As those protests continue around the country, many are pushing to turn this action into real change that will work to end systemic racism and racial inequity. Dr. Markisha Smith is the director of Portland's Department of Equity and Human Rights. She has been speaking at press conferences in recent days with Mayor Ted Wheeler, and she joins us live this morning to talk with us. Dr. Smith, good morning.
Good morning to you.
So good to have you with us. I'm curious about your thoughts so far on the protests we're seeing, especially over the weekend here. We saw kind of a pattern continue, largely peaceful demonstrations, and then ending the evening with a smaller group that tends to clash with police.
Yeah, I have been sharing, I think, over the past few days, what I'm noticing is as a shift. And I think that shift is really, a cry, right, for enough is enough. And so I am hopeful. I feel energized by what I'm seeing happen here and across the nation. I think that as long as we keep up this momentum, that folks are going to hear, leaders are going to hear, and this is really what it takes to have true reform, true change, and it is important. We are in a monumental time. This is a moment that if we let get away, it would, I think just be devastating. And so I am encouraged is what I would say is the word to use this morning about what I'm seeing.
Yeah, we've heard a lot of calls from protesters saying we need to make this change now. I know we've seen Commissioners Chloe Daly and Joanne Hardesty calling for a ban on tear gas. Mayor Wheeler is reviewing that and several other proposals, he said. From your discussions with the city, when could we start to see some real concrete things being laid out here?
I think really soon. I've heard the mayor say that everything's on the table and he is really thinking about the various options to make what we, consider policing work, and in particular work for Black folks. And so I think we could see things happen really quickly. I am working with bureau directors even now and having conversations about what do we need to be doing internally to change our systems. And as an office, our Office of Equity and Human Rights, we are constantly thinking about how we can make services and supports for folks in Portland better. And we have a clear focus and always have on race and disability. And at this moment, we're really thinking about what our work means for Black folks. And so I see some things happening in the very short term.
Yeah, certainly something we're going to be watching for in the coming weeks here. I know over the weekend we've been talking about Minneapolis city leaders announcing they are working to abolish their police department. We've heard a lot of calls from protesters about defunding police departments. What would that look like? What kind of changes do you think might be on the table here in Portland?
So I think the reality is we have to have some public safety option. There are things that happen, and we need to be able to have a body to respond to those things. I think what really gets tricky is that what we're seeing in current policing is damaging, right? It is devastating. It is taking the lives of Black folks across this nation, and that just can't happen. And so really for me, as a former educator, I think that we really have to be thinking about how are we educating our police officers? And it's not sort of these one and done exercises that happen, but really what is the ongoing commitment that we're gonna make to ensure that our police officers have the proper training in anti-Blackness, anti-racism, you name it, right? And that it happens consistently. And I think, that's gonna take shifting the way that we fund police, right? And so that those are sorts of things that are coming to mind for me. And I think we really have to be thinking about, what does that look like? And taking voices from the community to help inform those reforms.
Yeah, I know we've already seen some changes being discussed with the elimination of school resource officers in Portland Public Schools. So more change like that potentially down the pipeline. Dr. Smith, I wanted to ask you too, you spoke last week at some of these press conferences about people doing the work. It's time to do the work. And we've seen a lot of white people coming out to these demonstrations, maybe more than we've seen in previous demonstrations. It seems like a lot of people are really finally sitting up and paying attention. So what can people do as they work to become better allies, especially locally, not just on social media or not just with national organizations? What can people do in their community right now?
I think they could be having the conversations with their neighbors And if you are in a position where you have some influence over policy or procedure or practice in your community, then you really need to be centering the voices of Black folks, and asking them, what does this look like for you? How are you experiencing this particular service? I think that the protests are wonderful. And I think that folks have to be thinking about, now that we've done that, right, we'll get to the other side of this. How do we make sure that we have real sustainable change? And that can't happen without the voices of the individuals who are most impacted by what is going on right now. And those are, the black community. That's Black folks in Portland. I think that it can't be enough that you say, I have a Black friend or a Black neighbor. Like, you really have to understand. And although you can never, have that experience yourself, I think it's really important that you understand the pain and the hurt that has been, a part of Black folks' lives since the very beginning, and that there has to be space for that. And so it's not about anybody individually, but it is about collectively, what have our systems done to oppress Black folks since the beginning of time. And so I think that's really important to listen, to educate yourselves, to take the time to realize that there's some things you may not know. And sometimes that reflection can be uncomfortable. And I think that white folks have to sit in some of that discomfort and not take it personally, right? But really understand that this is a part of learning and growing. And so those are the things that I think are really going to continue to create strong white allyship in this movement.
Yeah, trying to do a lot of listening, which we have all done this week. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us. We appreciate your time this morning.